Record. Mhm.
Hello, I'm Jeff Krehmer, the author of Infinite Resources, and I'm with Roger Carlson, the author of the Saving the World Before Breakfast series of books. And we are saving the world before breakfast with infinite resources. Today,
Yes, tonight we're trying to guess what's going to happen in the Canadian election. Think of those sedate Canadians. Suddenly, they're going yeah, MAGA to the right and socialist to the left. We have no idea what's going on. You're closer to the situation. What's happening in your neck of the woods?
well, I should first of all say that we're 2 days away from the election in Canada. So we're talking on Easter Sunday, 2025, which is April 20th. And I'm just going to maybe give a bit of a summary of, from my perspective, what has gone on in Canada the last few years. So the Trudeau government, I would dare say, was not very popular because of fairly poor economic performance. A lot of the policies that people were fed up with are the same kind of things that I think got Donald Trump elected. So, a focus on DEI, a focus on virtue signaling for, with things like the carbon tax to try to prevent global warming. And I'm not suggesting that that's not an issue that needs to be dealt with. But my personal take on that specific topic is, I think a carbon tax is fine as long as everybody gets a carbon tax. And when Canada has 1.8% of global emissions, and we start putting on a carbon tax, we're hurting our industry and really not making any difference in the world when China and India and other countries are increasing their carbon emissions. So on that issue, I'll just drop that. But anyways, the government, Canada, if you compare the GDP growth and other economic factors to the United States, since the time that Trudeau took power, essentially had a flat performance. There was very, very small growth, almost almost none, like 2% over the last 10 years or so. Yeah, some small amount, don't quote me on that. But if you look at a graph, it basically, has a bump around the time of COVID where it goes down, it comes up, and we're just a few percentage points higher than we were 10 years ago. Whereas the United States had a pretty nice steady growth throughout that period, throughout Donald Trump's first term and Biden's second term, or first term, sorry.
After maybe 1.5 years of bad performance during COVID when things were
Right.
locked down.
Yeah. Um, so there were a lot of people, and some of the other economic things that the Trudeau government did that were kind of a bit of a hindrance. They put a cap on carbon emissions and how much oil could be produced. In essence, by capping carbon emissions for companies, they limited how much oil could be produced in the Alberta oil sands because it's a fairly energy intensive process. You have to heat the bitumen and then run it through several chemical processes to separate it from the dirt essentially. Or you can use a SAGD process, which I won't get into, but you can look it up. SAGD stands for steam assisted gravity drainage. And essentially, in that case, they just run some steam pipes through the dirt, the oil bearing dirt, and they release the steam in it. It basically drips into other pipes below where the steam is being released, and that's how they collect it. And surprisingly, a significant amount of oil is produced that way. Anyway, so there was a limit on how much oil could be produced. And for anyone who doesn't know, Alberta produces a lot of oil. Canada's got the third largest oil reserves in the world, I believe, after Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. And most of that is tied up in our oil bearing sands. And our largest, I think the single largest export that Canada has in terms of total dollars is our oil and gas products going to the United States. And I say going to the United States because something like 94% of all Canadian exports of fossil fuels go to the United States. Uh, one of the good things that the Trudeau government did, there was a lot of backlash originally when he was first elected against building new pipelines. And the Trudeau government made things worse because there was a pipeline that was going to go out to Eastern Canada. It was called Energy East. And the idea was, here we are, we have all this oil. And yet in Eastern Canada, because there's no decent pipelines to connect it to Alberta, we're importing oil from places like Nigeria and Saudi Arabia, which is completely illogical. And what happened when the Trudeau government came in, they brought in new rules that basically the project was all ready to go under the Harper government. They just had a few minor hurdles. And then the Trudeau government said, oh, what we're going to do is review the entire project again and add several new hurdles. And when the company that was working to develop it heard that information, they basically said, this is insane. We'll never get this done because ideologically, the environment minister, Stephen Guilbeault, was opposed to building pipelines. And not only did that cancel the Energy East project by putting on these new restrictions, they also ended up putting in a tanker ban on the West Coast. And just to give you an idea of how ridiculous this is, so the West Coast, and it's a tanker ban on the BC coast just north of Vancouver, essentially. You're not allowed to have any tankers over 80,000 barrels or some amount. Again, I'm just throwing that number out there. I'm not sure that's the correct number, but basically a tanker that would be intercontinental would not be able to ply those waters. But here's the silly part about it. If it was really an environmental thing, then why are we still allowing tankers every day to pass from Alaska to Washington State and California? Because they're going essentially through the same waters. So anyways, it was a political thing. A lot of people in British Columbia were opposed to building the pipeline as well. And by canceling those pipelines, basically the Trudeau government killed many billions of dollars of potential sales, international sales, I might add. So that's opening up markets outside of the United States. And the one good thing that they did for the oil industry is there was a company that wanted to expand an existing pipeline called the Trans Mountain Pipeline. It was Kinder Morgan. And when they had all of these new restrictions placed on them and the political opposition from indigenous groups and other protesters, people saying, oh, well, new tankers are going to kill the orcas and, in the Vancouver Island area and things like this, when of course there's hundreds of ships that go through there every day. So it's adding one more tanker a day wouldn't make that much of a difference. But anyway, there was a lot of opposition to it. And Kinder Morgan said, well, we can't do this. And the Canadian government stepped in and bought the pipeline from Kinder Morgan, and then they developed it themselves. So right now, the people of Canada own a pipeline that is running at near capacity. I think they're over 90% now. And ironically, most of the oil that goes through that pipeline is still going to the United States. So it goes to Washington and California. But anyway, so that's in my home province of Alberta, that's a huge issue because the oil industry is by far the biggest industry in the province in terms of economic activity. And we have things in Canada that are called transfer payments. So the provinces that are economically doing well help the provinces that aren't doing so economically well. And essentially, Alberta, every year, except for one of the years during COVID, in the last 50 years, we've been a have province, which means that we put money into the system, more money into the system than we get back from the federal government. And the biggest recipient of those transfer payments has been Quebec over the years, and Eastern Canada, the Atlantic provinces of Newfoundland, Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia are continually in that same kind of boat, except Newfoundland now has started to develop some of their offshore oil as well with the Hibernia project. So that's from an energy perspective, that's where things were. And like I said, economically, the country hadn't been performing. A lot of people were fed up with DEI and other social programs that the liberals were promoting. And one of my friends who's from Israel is said in the last few years, since October 7th, there's been a huge anti-Semitic backlash against Jewish people as well in Canada, and Palestinian protests, pro-Palestinian protests, openly calling for the annihilation of the Jews and of the state of Israel, haven't been suppressed basically by the government, because it's politically the Muslim population is becoming a stronger force. And one of the other things, just like in the United States, the Trudeau government basically had an open immigration policy with the intention of bringing in lots and lots of people from all over the world, but not having a really good plan for it. So what ended up happening there was that the price of housing started to increase, so that new families can't afford to buy a house, essentially. And one of the largest parts of the problem there is in Vancouver. We have a lot of wealthy people from China, Hong Kong. They set up, they will just buy a house sight unseen. In the event that there's some sort of political turmoil in Hong Kong, they have a place to go to. So there's a lot of houses that are owned by wealthy people. Other people in Toronto, in particular, they buy up houses with the intention of operating them as bed and breakfasts, and they see the appreciating value. So basically, it's a good investment. They can write it off as a business expense because they're operating it as a B&B. And again, families are prevented from buying those houses. It's very similar to what's happening, I think, in the United States, where large companies like BlackRock are buying up real estate. And so families aren't able to, start out with a starter home, that sort of thing. So the government is unpopular. And so much so that Chrystia Freeland, who is the minister, I forget, she had an important portfolio. Might have been industry or finance or something like that. I think it was finance. She basically, when the prime minister asked her to table the next thing, he essentially, I think, was asking her to lie about some of the numbers. And she said, I'm not going to do that. And she basically said, I'm not going to support this government anymore. And she started a revolt against Trudeau. And there in Canada, we don't have set election dates like you have in the United States, but the election is supposed to be called within a certain period of time of the previous election, usually about 4 years. And we're at 3.5 years right now. So when Trudeau realized he had lost support of his cabinet, he decided it was time to step down. And so the Liberal Party had a leadership race. So comparable to the Democratic Convention or the Republican National Convention, whatever. And in that race, so and let's just put a little bit of what's going on internationally now. So during that time, of course, Donald Trump gets elected. And he starts all this rhetoric about, I'm not going to rule out the possibility of invading Greenland using military force, or taking back the Panama Canal using military force. And Canada would be a wonderful 51st state. And I'd love to see Mr. Trudeau be the Governor Trudeau. And so this was creating a whole lot of anti-American sentiment in Canada. And the Conservative Party is very much, they had been aligned to a lot of what the Republican Party was doing. And so Pierre Poilievre's campaign was essentially, he didn't think that Trudeau was going to resign, so he was expecting, I'll be running up against Trudeau. So his platform was attack Trudeau, very similar to how Trump was attacking Biden and Harris. And then the other thing was he was going to axe the tax. He has these wonderful catchphrases. So he's going to axe the carbon tax, which has been unpopular in Canada and not very effective, I would say, in reducing carbon emissions, as it turns out, according to the new Liberal leader who was elected, Carney. He said that the carbon tax only reduced carbon use, like fossil fuel use, by about 6%, but it was hugely unpopular and divisive. So one of the first things he did was he basically said, we're going to get rid of this tax. He basically made a proclamation. And so for personal purposes, the tax has been removed for gasoline and stuff like that. And when Parliament is reconvenes after the election, if he's elected, he says he'll make it permanent. So whether the Liberals or the Conservatives, who are the two front-running parties in Canada, both of them have basically said they're going to get rid of the carbon tax. So at least for individuals, the Liberals say they might keep it in place for the industry. Okay, so that's the situation. And basically, because of the unpopularity of Trudeau, Pierre Poilievre's government, or opposition, was looking really good, and they had like a 10-point lead in the polls over the Liberals, and they were poised to win this election. And then all this business with Trump started, and you really got the hackles up on the Americans. Really, like the politics there, this whole business about the tariffs, because of course the tariffs are not helping anybody. They are essentially causing global trade to slow down and reducing economic productivity. You can listen to people like Jeffrey Sachs if you want to have more on that information. Don't take it from me. Anyway, with this dislike of the change in American leadership, there was a significant swing in public opinion. And so now Pierre Poilievre is being seen as Trump Jr., and that's my terminology. But essentially, he was saying things like "Make Canada Great Again" and all that sort of stuff. And so the parallels are quite clear that he was thinking of having a similar government to what Trump has. But as we look at what's going on in the United States and the total disarray of changing policies, like supporting Ukraine in their fight against Russia, to supporting Russia and trying to impose a peace deal on Ukraine that without the Ukrainians even being at the table originally, those kinds of things. And all the business with Panama, and now China, what is it, 135% tariffs on stuff from China? It changes so quickly, I don't know what the numbers are anymore. But unfortunately, what's happened, instead of being a stable trading partner where Canada and Mexico and the United States had a free trade agreement on most products, now we've got 10% tariffs on everything pretty much. And it's really going to throw a wrench into the system in terms of things like producing automobiles, which have crossed the border between Canada, Mexico, and the United States continually. So like any given car that's made by the North American automakers probably has parts from each country, and components have crossed the borders multiple times. So
yes, back and forth to finally get a complete car.
Yeah, exactly. So where it stands right now, the Conservatives have dropped in popularity by about, I think, 10%. The Liberals have risen by more than 10%. So they have not only taken the disgruntled, or the people who are on the fence from the Conservatives, but they've also taken voters from the other parties that are participating. So in Canada, we have some fairly minor parties. The third largest party in Canada is the New Democratic Party, and they're more socialists, left-leaning than the Liberals, which are kind of a centrist party. And then you've also got the Green Party, and in Quebec we have something called the Bloc Québécois, which basically just stands up for Quebec's rights and try to hold the balance of power in any government so they get what their province wants. So it's a very interesting political arena. But it looks like the Bloc Québécois, the NDP, and the Greens have all lost support in favor of Mark Carney. And Mark Carney comes in. He was the leader of the Bank of Canada during the 2008 financial crisis. So he has a really good financial background. He worked for some big Wall Street companies. He has an education that I think includes American universities and like Oxford. And so he's got a very, and he got those on scholarship. So he's a very bright fellow. And so he was running the Bank of Canada. He was actually appointed to the Bank of Canada by the last progressive conservative leader, or whatever they're calling themselves, conservative leader anyways, Stephen Harper, back, like I say, around the 2008 timeframe. And then after he worked at the Bank of Canada, and Canada, by the way, came out of the 2008 financial crisis in the best shape of any of the G7 countries. So we had the least economic downturn of any of them.
Mm-hmm.
And based on that, for the first time in UK history, they hired Mark Carney as the leader of the Bank of England, right at the time when they were going through the Brexit situation where the UK left the European Union. So he oversaw two crises, and I think is regarded as having handled both of them quite well from a financial perspective. So given that financial background and the current global upheaval in the economic order, if you will, he seems like a pretty good candidate to be running the country. And I think that's a large part of the reason why he's gained so much support in Canada. He does seem to be the strongest, or the smartest man in the room in terms of the leaders that were there.
Mm-hmm. So you decided, eh?
Well, so I've decided. I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be voting. I mean, he'd have to do something idiotic in the next 2 days for me not to vote for him. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of, like I said, there's been a fairly large swing. You're going to have your diehard conservatives, and I know several here in Alberta. Alberta is a particularly conservative area. They're not going to change no matter what. And then you got your diehard NDP supporters and so forth. But in terms of the actual group of people who generally decide the elections, the undecided voters, I think most of them are leaning towards voting for Mark Carney too. But again, I'm speaking mostly for like Eastern Canada. In Alberta, I'm sure that the Conservatives are going to win here. And like I said, before Carney was elected, if it was a choice between Poilievre and Trudeau, I'd be voting Poilievre, because I was completely sick and tired of the poor economic performance and the virtue signaling, and there were a couple of scandals involved with the Trudeau government as well. So I don't think there's many people who are sad to see him leave at this point. Mm-hmm. Now, I should also mention when he was running for the Liberal Party, before he was elected leader, I actually went out to listen to what he had to say back in the early days of his campaign. So, and I met him, shook his hand, and I have a picture of him with my then very young daughter. I think she was like 4 years old or something. And so when he was talking at that time, he was talking about legalizing marijuana, and the stuff that he was talking about kind of made a lot of sense, and I supported him in that. And in Canada, it's almost like, even though we have multiple parties, it's not very different from the United States in that there's two main parties, and it's almost like they play revolving doors. And so we get sick of one group, and then the other one gets elected in, and that's basically how it works. But yeah, anyway, so initially, like I was a little bit unhappy with Stephen Harper's government because I perceived them as being anti-science. They were cutting funding for science stuff. They were making decisions that were opposed to scientific, uh, proof and stuff like that. So of course, I didn't
What
support them.
scientific things were they against?
A lot of climate science type stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, and I know we had that discussion a couple of weeks ago. I question a lot about the climate science too, but some of it's pretty much undeniable. And I mean, what happened in LA a few weeks ago, right? I mean, yes, there have been forest fires throughout history, but it does seem like they're on the uptick somehow or another. Like we've never seen.
I'm in LA.
Well, I've never seen
they drained one of the key reservoirs near Pacific Palisades. They thought they were going to fix it, but then they forgot to fix it, and they forgot to tell the fire department that they had not fixed it. And the fire
there's incompetence as well, of course.
Their with their hoses, and suddenly the water gave out.
Yeah, no, obviously there's incompetence involved in that too. But I mean, there are things that you can't deny. Like the climate is getting warmer, whether or not it's man-made or not. We can have an argument about that. But if you just look at, for instance, historic sea ice for the extent of sea ice from the Arctic Ocean and how much it's been melting, you can go online and see that it's on average every decade shrinking in terms of what's left over at the end of the summer. So those kinds of things. But the conservative government of Stephen Harper was kind of opposed to that. And anyway, so the revolving door of politics goes on, and right now, Carney seems to have the advantage in the polls. And again, like I'm talking from Alberta, which is a conservative area, and so here's the funny thing too. So Poilievre's, like I said, I supported a lot of what he had to say. So he's like, "We'll get rid of the carbon tax. We'll get rid of the tanker ban on the West Coast. We'll get rid of the restrictions on building infrastructure projects, and we'll encourage foreign investment to come into Canada to develop our mines and all these other."
Oh, oh, we have a freeze.
For contractors to build new homes. So
you lost about 30 seconds there, or maybe 20 seconds of your time there.
Okay, sorry. Anyways, Poilievre was saying that they would rebuild, they'd get rid of the tanker ban, get rid of the restrictions on major infrastructure projects like pipelines, and help new families to get homes by streamlining the process for getting permits and making it easier for contractors to build and this sort of thing. And so, as I mentioned earlier, those are the kinds of pillars that he was running on. And so when Carney got elected, the first thing he did was he axed the tax. Second thing, obviously, he got elected because Trudeau stepped down. So those were two of the major pillars that Poilievre was running on. And now Carney, who originally lived in Alberta for some time, so he's very familiar with Alberta's politics and this sort of thing. He agrees we should build more pipelines, and he's in favor of that. And he also agrees that we need to build more houses. And so I was talking with a friend of mine, and he was like, "Well, Carney's just gone and stolen all the good ideas from Poilievre." And I said, "Yeah, that's the way the Liberal Party has worked over the years. That's why we've got a healthcare system like we do. So they take the good ideas." And like the original proposal for universal health care came from the CCP, which turned into the NDP, the socialist group that I mentioned earlier. But they've never held power in Canada. But that idea was so popular and resonated with Canadians so much that the Liberals said, "Hey, you know what? if we don't implement this, the NDP probably will get elected. So let's get behind this and build a national healthcare system.
Mhm.
And so my response to him was, I don't care, who had the ideas originally, as long as they get implemented. And at this point, it looks like it might be Carney's government that will do the implementation of those good ideas coming from the Conservatives.
Okay. Got it. That was all right. Yeah, so that was the view on it. Now, my subversive thought is it's when Carney was working for the Bank of England, that's when they implemented their zero net zero program, which was getting rid of fossil fuels and lots of wind, which worked fine, except when they had some particularly calm weather,
Mhm.
which it was like, oh, nobody really thought about that. We just assumed that wind could be depended on.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, was he just going along because that was what the government was doing there, or was that his feeling and he might have different views once he gets elected? Because
So I
like
think,
North America, Joe Biden was the middle of the road, grandfatherly type. And then when he got in, he made Barry Obama look like Trump. He went way, or whoever was running the government when Gramps took his 4 o'clock nap in the afternoon.
yeah. So here's the thing. I think that Mark Carney is committed to fighting climate change. He has been an advisor to the Trudeau government, which is one of the things that my conservative friends like to point out. And they say, how can you support him when he advised the government the last several years? And, like all of the politicians, he's been present at Davos. And so a lot of people say, well, he's part of this New World Order thing
Mm-hmm.
that's coming out of Europe and stuff. And so I asked one of the guys who said, oh, yeah, he's part of the New World Order. And I said, so is Trump part of the New World Order too? He said, probably, I think so. But I mean, there's so many different conspiracies, and it all depends on which podcast you're listening to these days, because people are turning off from mainstream media.
Yeah, Trump is a heretic at Davos.
Well,
And
yeah.
surprisingly, he's getting union support because tariffs are something the unions have been wanting. And they said, they've been killing us. Wall Street makes money, but the working man gets laid off. So factories can go to China or factories can go to the Mercado south of the border. And Trump says, hey, I'm going to keep this one plant going.
There's a wonderful, brilliant speech that I heard. I just watched it a few hours ago. Jeffrey Sachs talking at the Antalya Diplomatic Forum. And you can look this up. So if you do a search, Jeffrey Sachs : China beats US in every trade metric. And it's like an hour-long video. The first 10 minutes are brilliant and just basically shoot down Trump's policies. But what he points out there is, so one of my friends was like, oh yeah, take a look at like the Chinese yuan. It's like dropped dramatically ever since Trump has been doing the this tariff thing. And I said, well, that's very interesting, yes. But take a look at the US stock market, because the stock market has fallen 12% since February, but the yuan has fallen 15%. Sounds like a very costly program that you have to bring down the yuan here. But what Sachs says is, American trade with the United States makes up about 15, or sorry, purchasing stuff from the United States is only about 15% of the stuff that they get internationally. And yet they have trade exports all around the world. So even if the United States was to completely be cut off from trading with China, which 125% tariffs is pretty much putting you in that category, China will survive pretty well. but China is the United States' third largest trading, or well, quite frankly, Canada, Mexico, and China almost have the same amount of trade between the three of them with the United States. So they're all within like $500 million the last time I checked. So all three are very important trading partners. And of course, those are the three that Trump went after initially with the tariffs. So you just got to wonder what he's thinking. So his thinking, apparently, if you look at the way that he calculated retribution trade tariffs, is if a company has a trade surplus with you, then you have to tax them more so that they have less of a surplus. But as Sachs points out, he says, well, I work for my university and they have a huge deficit to me because they pay me for my work and all that stuff. And then I take that money and I go spend it at the grocery store. So I have a trade imbalance with them. And, but in effect, what we're doing is we're trading goods and doing it in an efficient manner instead of having to say, oh, university, I'm going to work for you and you're going to pay me, but I'm going to want to do that same thing when I go to the grocery store. So I'll write you an essay, Mr. Grocer, and you can give me some food. That doesn't work, right? And we're kind of seeing that a little bit. We're kind of seeing that a little bit with China canceling all their orders for Boeing. So they've said now because of these tariffs, they're not going to take delivery on any aircraft. So I think that's over 100 aircraft that they had ordered. And that's the kind of loss of an order for a company that's already in financial difficulty that could send them over the rails, right?
Well, Boeing has its own other problems.
True. Yes.
But I'll tell you, Jeffrey Sachs has his view on things, and he's one of the enviro people. But the issue with China is, and the relations are very much like Imperial Japan in the 1930s, where they built a chain of fortress islands throughout the Pacific, preparing for doing what they eventually did. And Franklin Roosevelt was doing some of the same things to Imperial Japan that Trump is doing to China, because you can see the handwriting is on the wall that they want to take back that wayward province, which is now the leading center for highly advanced chips.
Microchips, absolutely.
These are the chips that run the most advanced things.
Right.
And I worked for a group at NASA that was as a sideline to going into space. They and the Air Force and a number of companies and the Navy, they would check on different fabs, fabrication centers. They call them fabs, and they'd go to Texas Instruments. They would go to a place like IBM and things.
Yeah.
And of course, they went to Taiwan. And the guy that I worked for in particular said, I went to this place and it was this size of an arena. It was this huge factory making chips.
Yeah.
And so much of it was automated. I said, can I look inside? It's like, well, you can look through the window here. So I don't want to do things. So they were just so far in advance of most of the fabs.
Yeah.
And so if China got that, it would be like when Germany got Czechoslovakia. Thank you, Mr. Umbrella, Neville Chamberlain.
Right.
So fortunately, the Chinese communists didn't seize their opportunity when they had Biden in there. Trump is dealing with them, and they are maneuvering very much like America, Britain, China, and the
So
Dutch, the
that's very
ABCD
interesting.
maneuver that it was before Pearl Harbor. So
Yeah.
the maneuver is they can push them to the edge. Meanwhile, they've already had a collapse of their real estate market.
Mhm.
So they're not in such great shape.
Yeah, they had a huge real estate bubble. So Morris Chang is the guy who started TSMC, which is the chip manufacturing company. He used to work at Texas Instruments. He was trained in the United States,
Mhm.
and the Americans, of course, even under Biden, recognize that this is a serious security concern
Mhm.
if China was to invade Taiwan. And so that's why TSMC is building a plant in Arizona as we speak.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think that if there was an invasion, that plant in Taiwan would absolutely be destroyed. But here's a couple of interesting things. So that company has made its fortune. So they make chips for NVIDIA and for all the other manufacturers. And their deal is we will not take your technology or whatever. You give us the blueprints, we'll manufacture it. We'll focus on getting it done properly. The technology that they use to make those chips, I think, is from Holland or some other country where they have these, I don't know, X-ray engravers or whatever they use. And what Peter Zion likes to point out, he says, if you want to have a chip manufacturing industry, like there's 200 different suppliers that you're dealing with. And so they've got this whole supply chain that's integrated in Taiwan. And now you start putting tariffs on stuff and or you say you want to move it to the United States. You can't just do that overnight. You have to,
Mhm.
develop that supply chain locally. And I mean, I understand Trump's argument in the sense of, oh, well, we want to
Mhm.
bring manufacturing back home. But the whole point of free trade is if you can do something less expensive and better than I can, I'm willing to trade you something that I can do better and less expensive. Unfortunately, what's happened over the years is other countries have gotten less expensive and better than American manufacturers overall. And so that's why you've got this huge trade deficit now.
And also, some countries use predatory policies. The
Sure.
government subsidizes a target industry, destroys the competition, and then they can raise the prices.
Mm-hmm.
Or, as we're seeing now with rare earth elements, they can cut off the supply,
Yeah. But
which
it was
demonstrates why Biden, to some extent, and Trump now much more, both presidents have been starting to wage the effort against the Chinese Communist mainland.
right. So it's, of course, the people who do strategic thinking for the military know that the rare earth elements are coming from China. When Biden came to Canada a few years ago, he spoke to our parliament and he said, we want to develop your rare earth minerals that you have up in the Arctic. We'll give you the funding. You go get the process started and this sort of thing. So there are other sources, but even under the best circumstances, which the Trudeau government was not,
Mm-hmm.
even under the best circumstances, you're looking probably at least 5 years before you could get a mine up and running. There's a
Yeah.
lot of logistics that has to go into place before you can start pulling ore out of the ground.
Yeah, 5, 10, 15 years to get a mine
Exactly. A,
operating.
a lot of infrastructure projects, they're looking at 19 years here in Canada, which is way too long. And that's one of the arguments. I have some friends who say, it's idiotic that we would invest in pipelines now because by the time that they start pumping oil through them, we'll have already moved on to cleaner sources of energy.
Mm-hmm. Well, some of the same people, or maybe their parents, were saying, we'll reach peak oil
That's
by
right.
the 90s. and then it's just going to go straight down from there.
Yeah, I'm not
It
saying I
didn't go
agree
straight
with them.
down from
I'm
there.
just saying that there is that argument out there. And
Mhm.
as an example of where that actually happened, if you look at, say, Colombia, they never bothered to put in telephone poles in all their communities and stuff. They just went straight to cell phones. So, I mean, there is the possibility that the technology will overtake the, the current what's currently available and make it obsolete. So,
There is that possibility, but that was the thing, the difference between uh, Edison coming in with phonographs and things. You could do those things quickly. When you want to new add new technology for power plants and utilities, some of the transformers in California have been there for 75 years.
mhm.
And there is some replacement, but there's such a huge investment thing that builds up over time. Likewise, cars and whatnot. And handily, uh, Trump's buddy Elon Musk is getting shafted for his political beliefs, and BYD, which is the Chinese version,
Yeah,
comparable advanced company in China. Well, there's a tariff against them,
yeah.
and Tesla is getting hurt here. So, hey, we might not have those electric cars nearly as fast as the pie in the sky enviros were saying.
Well, I think pretty much all auto manufacturers are building some form of electric car right now. So if Tesla's not going to supply it, GM or Ford or someone will. Now,
But they've been losing money. And that's another thing that the unions were complaining about. They say, we know that what's being produced is losing money. It was politically expedient to do it because the government is threatening them, like, you better be producing those, or
yeah.
blah, blah, like in California, again,
So this
America's
goes back.
version of Trudeau, only not as bright.
This this
Gavin
goes
Newsom.
back to the argument of why do we have trade? If the Chinese can build electric cars better than we can, cheaper
Mm-hmm.
than we can, why aren't we just buying them from them? It's kind of interesting
Because
because
they will use electric tanks to come after us if we help them too much.
the Europeans are in exactly
As
the
Cato
same
would
boat.
say,
Yeah,
communist Chinese regime must be destroyed.
yeah. Well, and I'm not going to even argue that. I mean, I'm not a fan of the communist regime in China, but I do have to say that they managed to get stuff done. You know,
Mm-hmm. They make the trains run on time.
and not only the trains, but the high speed trains.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they've done a lot of impressive things over the years. They've done a lot of shady things over the years, but you know, the whole point of them building up their navy, arguably, is so that they can attack Taiwan. But
Mm-hmm.
their navy isn't strong enough at this point to take on the world. And if foreign sources of oil that don't include Russia are cut off, and most of them then come from the from Middle East, they
Mm-hmm.
all have to go through the Strait of Malacca.
Yeah,
And,
I think Peter Zion, he's mentioned that as well. It's like a
yeah,
pretty narrow strait there for a lot of tankers coming from Iraq, Iran, Persia, I mean, Iraq,
yeah.
Iran, Saudi,
And before they get there, they
Kuwait.
have to go through the Indian-controlled Andaman Islands and stuff. So, um, if China gets on the wrong side of a few nations, they'll still get oil from Russia, presumably, but they they might not be as flush with fuel, let's say, as they would normally be.
Yeah, it have to be some really, really long pipelines going across Central Asia and Siberia are so huge. That does slow things down, but it's straightforward technology doing that, and they're getting a lot of brownie points for sending their troops. In fact, a few Chinese have been captured just recently.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unclear if they're volunteers or if they're, Chinese military. I think they were basically just being paid as mercenaries.
Hmm. Yeah. But anyway, that's yeah. The issue is there's there's so many echoes of things in history. Building up the Navy, that was Germany in
Mhm.
the 1890s, early 1900s, and it's like, well, what's going to happen with this? And so it's first there's economic struggles back and forth, and then it gets to be the real thing, and especially with Taiwan. If if Taiwan was if New Zealand was Taiwan, if the Taiwanese, if the nationalists had gone to New Zealand and had their factories, their fabs there, it wouldn't be such a deal. But as this thing is, it's right there where they could be grabbed.
Mhm.
And a country that has those fabs suddenly takes over. You can argue about electric cars might come in 10 or 20, 30 years, but advanced chips are there right now. The country that has the advanced chips can do things. It's like Ukraine, part of the reason why they've been able to stand off the Russians to a large extent is they have their little drones for taking pictures out in the backyard at birds,
Mhm.
and those things are dropping grenades, or they
Yeah.
take a shell and chop it in half and attach it on a drone, and that drone crashes into a truck. Now they're set for bringing, I believe the number that sticks in my mind is 4 million drones per year
Yeah.
from the
It,
Ukraine.
it has been a very, what do they call it? Asymmetric warfare. The Ukrainians have been, I mean, the Russians have drones too, but the Ukrainians have been much better at using their drones effectively and taking
Mhm.
out, $400,000 radar system or $400 million radar systems and multi-million dollar tanks with a drone that costs a few
Mhm.
$100s.
Yeah, and submarines and cruisers.
Right, exactly, and yeah, so they took out the Moskva with uh, I think three of their Trident, not Trident, what are they called? Poseidon type missiles or something. I forget what they
Mhm.
call the Ukrainian missile, but it was a homegrown Ukrainian build, and
Mhm.
these drone boats are getting more sophisticated so that they now have anti-aircraft capabilities and they hunt in packs and it's
Mhm.
pretty amazing stuff. So basically the Russian fleet has been banished from the western part of the Black Sea. So
Yeah, or maybe the western two-thirds, and they're hiding out in the uh, on the far east side port there, and not going too far out of port.
yeah, and the Turks aren't letting them out of the Black Sea either, or letting other ones in. So
Yeah, well, Turkey's in a funny position because these things were negotiated over decades, and navies came in and out, and the Turks. Not that they're always the nicest people in the world, as pardon the understatement there, but they have these agreements so that Turkey won't be in the middle of a war, and so there's solid reasons, diplomatic reasons for not letting people in and out, and they're not real keen on the American fleet coming in either. I
right,
think that's another no-no.
yeah.
So that's to the good. And meanwhile, back at China and Russia, the onset of drones is comparable to World War One, or better yet, more like World War Two, when suddenly uh, fighter planes and paratroopers and high velocity guns came in. And now that that's an established technology, the Russians and the People's Republic of China on the mainland, they think, oh, we can do that. So they're going to be coming back, and I'm sure the Russians will be producing 10 million drones per year, and the Chinese would be doing 20 million, and that would be part of a major attack. And talking about asymmetric,
Mhm.
it, part of the thing about uh, World War II was that the Germans had to give away most of their weaponry, and so they built new highfalutin stuff, and that's part of why they were winning so much at the beginning of the war. And so likewise, uh, the Chinese as well, and they Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev would said, we can destroy all those carriers in half an hour. Well, he couldn't at the time, but the drones by the thousands could conceivably do it, even though their
Well,
carriers might be a little flaky, and their submarines. One of them sank at the dock.
yeah.
Very much like
I,
the Vasa, was it 300 years ago? No, 400 years ago, I think. And
the
they were at the dock.
Swedish battleship, yeah. But it's interesting. You got that point exactly right. I don't think we're going to see any aircraft carriers getting very close to, the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz or anything like that anytime soon. Because, if the Houthis can shoot 20 missiles at once at a target, they might be able to take out a carrier, right?
Yes, the United States, again, another one of the stumbling older powers, is finally getting that lesson. And people have been talking about this for 20 or 30 years. If you have an anti-missile missile, it has to be so much more advanced than the missile that's shooting at you. People just, you have 10 anti-missile missiles, and they send 100 rockets, you just get overwhelmed. But now they're getting uh, cheaper drones to knock things out. It's
Yeah.
very much like the super advanced of planes, say
Yeah.
from about 1915 to 1918 in World War One, and then definitely about from 1938 to 1945, where they went to faster planes and then jets
Well,
and
yeah,
radars
World
and
War One was multiple
proximity
wings.
fuses.
Yeah, World War II is primarily single wing aircraft, and then after that, we started to get in like the Me-262 was very close to being supersonic, and then of course you got the Americans with the Bell aircraft
Yeah, that
breaking
was
the sound
after they.
barrier.
There's
Yeah,
a whole
after the
ironic
war.
thing where the British had a jet plane, and they told the Americans about it, and then they said, "Okay, and what advances have you got to share with us?" And the Americans said, "No, we're not allowed to tell you."
But
If
the
the
other
Americans
interesting thing
had given
was,
the British jets some help, they might have been shooting down more of the German jets. Although fortunately, at the end of World War II, the jets were still very inefficient, so they weren't that dangerous.
yeah.
Although,
Well, when the Americans came into the war, the British basically said, "Look, we got all these great ideas and technologies that we developed over the years, but we can't manufacture them all." And so they basically gave them all their top secret stuff, and the Americans put their best minds to work and developed a lot of those technologies, things like radar and that sort of stuff. Of course,
yeah, they did share. I think they were better with sharing the radar technology and some of the
it was a
other
matter of survival because they didn't have the industrial capacity to make it happen. And the United States had a lot more resources. Um, and the Americans, of course, had the Norden bomb sight. And do you know what the three most expensive operation or projects during the Second World War were for the Americans? I think for the whole war, actually.
let's see. Uh, of course, the Manhattan Project for the bomb would be one of them,
Right?
and then I'm giving up for development projects. I would think jets would be another one.
The Americans weren't doing much with jets.
Oh, okay. Uh, Penicillin?
No, I'll give them to you. The Norden bomb sight and the B-29 bomber.
Okay, yeah, yeah,
They
because
were,
the Pacific was so much uh, farther farther away.
yeah.
Hmm.
Um,
I mean,
I got
all those little islands and finally the islands of Japan.
yeah, Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Bomber Mafia, talks a lot about the Norden bomb site, and I think that's where I learned that little tidbit.
Mhm.
But yeah, anyways, fascinating stuff. So we've moved a long way from the Canadian election, and we're coming up at about 9 o'clock.
Yeah, that's probably a good sign. We got Canadian election and and the economic warfare going along in the world. And we didn't get to all the other people, some of whom are making deals. Although my subversive thought was just like, oh, there's tariffs all over the place. Oh, it's okay with you. It's okay with you. It's okay. And then, oh, well, there's just one that we haven't quite fixed yet, China. So maybe that was the game all along. So
Yeah.
people wouldn't notice where that was the target. That was my subversive thought. And we'll see what happens on Tuesday. And then 6 months later, we'll see if Carney is going to go through with axing the taxes or if he'll morph back into uh, uh, Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, I just sent you the link to that talk by Jeffrey Sachs. The
Uh,
first 10 minutes are enlightening, but the entire thing is interesting to watch. So,
let me get this right,
so yeah, maybe
lest
you
I
can include
forget.
that if you're
There it
going to
is.
post this.
Whoa. Whoops, I better. Oh, yeah, that's Jeffrey Sachs.
Yeah.
In
So,
passing, Jeffrey Sachs is one of the uh, uh, global warming doomers.
yeah, fair enough. But he's also got some valid points for the what's going on with the tariffs and so forth. So I thought it was worth listening to. And he also makes a good gives a good explanation of why China is not going to lose in a trade war with the United States. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, have to do more things. Anyway, so yeah, I'll
I might not be
record it
available.
and post it. I think I might not have posted last week's either, so I'll get them both
Yeah.
by
Anyway,
tomorrow.
cut out this end bit, and I guess we'll say our goodbyes. The I might not be available for next Sunday because I'm going to be visiting my mom in Calgary.
Oh, well, that's nice. Yeah, visit the family, and yeah, we've got some family things going on as well. So maybe we'll just skip a couple of weeks, and if it changes, let me know, and I'll and check with me, and if I'm
Yeah.
available. But let's figure week after next.
Yeah. All right. Well, next time we talk, we'll see how good my predictions on the election go.
Yeah. Okay. Talk to you then. Good night.
Good night.